Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about evolution 5, the three domains of life, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Please keep in mind that eukarya and archaea are more closely related to each other compared to bacteria. So bacteria is our most distant relative. So we're going to talk about one at a time. Here are the three domains. The first one is the domain bacteria. You need to remember the similarities and differences between bacteria and us because ultimately we're still distant cousins. We are related to each other. So the domain bacteria, you can see that there is a cell membrane, there is DNA, there is cytoplasm, and there's ribosome. Those are all characteristics that we as eukaryotes also have. And cell wall is a characteristic that plant cells have. So, if we think about cell structure, although there are a lot of differences, there are also a lot of similarities. And you should remember the similarities. So here's another bacteria. This bacteria specifically has the flagellum, which is also an organelle that eukaryotic cells can have. So the domain bacteria are all single-celled. All prokaryotes are single-celled. So bacteria, archaea, they're all unicellular. And they don't have what we call internal membranes. So no internal membranes means although bacteria cells have an outer membrane, it doesn't have any organelles inside the cell that has membrane. So there is no nucleus, no mitochondria, no chloroplast. If you can't remember what those look like, you can take a look at the other picture. So, or Golgi body. So here's Golgi. These are the rough ER and smooth ER right outside the nucleus. And the nucleus itself is also surrounded by a membrane. But what are membranes? They're kind of like bubbles. They're films surrounding parts, right? So mitochondria, as you can see, they're membranes on the outside, just like the cell membrane, but except these are internal membranes. So bacteria doesn't have any of that. Some bacteria are aerobic, meaning that they need oxygen to survive, and some are anaerobic, meaning that they don't need oxygen. And in fact, some bacteria can get poisoned by oxygen. So on one hand, oxygen is needed. On one hand, oxygen is not needed. And another possibility is that oxygen has to be completely avoided. Bacteria have a thick, rigid cell wall in addition to the cell membrane. So all bacteria have cell wall and the cell membrane. Bacteria, so what is its job, right? Well, what is the function of bacteria? Obviously, they don't exist just to have jobs for us, but they're also very helpful for other organisms. For example, they're all a lot of bacteria are decomposers, meaning that they can decompose dead material, and it can help animals digest food. So they're cleaning up the planet and they're helping us digest. Bacteria can also be used for genetic engineering. So now that we know more and more about different ways we can use biotechnology, we can use bacteria to help us insert certain pieces of genes into, another person, for example. We're kind of exploring that area a little bit. Bacteria can also be a pathogen. So the word pathogen is something that you have to know. A pathogen is anything that's disease-causing. So a bacteria can be disease-causing, as you know. Some bacteria can carry out conjugation. So conjugation is when one bacteria and another bacteria are close together and they form kind of a little bridge in between, a little pilus, and then one bacteria can send a copy of its plasmid and a power-up DNA, basically, to another bacteria so they can both have the power-up and become more fit for the environment. So that's one way that bacteria can gain genetic diversity from the surrounding environment. The next one is called the domain archaea. Archaea are all unicellular as well, and they have no internal membranes, just like bacteria. These are also prokaryotes, right? Many archaea can live in extreme environment without oxygen. So this is one main thing that you have to remember about archaea. What's so special about it? Well, first off, we don't know nearly as much about archaea compared to some of the other things that we study. But archaea can a lot of times live in very extreme environment without oxygen. For example, the really salty lake or even places near the volcano, we can find archaea there. So here's just some examples that you can think about. They're methanogens. These are archaea that can produce energy and survive by producing methanes. They're halophiles that can survive at high salt concentration environments, and thermophiles that can thrive in high temperatures. Now, the last one is our domain eukarya. Eukarya they all have a nucleus and they all have internal organelles. So those are the roughy R, smoothie R, lysosomes, vacuoles, and the Golgi body. These are all examples of internal organelles, and these are all bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So here's a picture of a eukaryotic cell. Now, this three-domain system, bacteria, archaea, eukarya, kind of developed recently, historically. There was also a six-kingdom system right under the three domains. So the three domains are the biggest category that we can have. Our bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, all of the living organisms can be characterized under these three categories. But as you can see, we can also have a six-kingdom system right underneath the largest domains. We can split it up a little bit more. So this one right here and this one right here is the corresponding kingdoms. So the bacteria domain is the same thing as the bacteria kingdom falls right under bacteria domain. They're talking about the same type of organism. They're all bacteria. The archaea domain and the archaea kingdom are also the same thing. They're talking about the same organisms. Now, eukarya has four kingdoms. So Protista, Plantae, and Fungi, and Animalia, these are all kingdoms that fall under the domain eukarya. So these are four subcategories. And now we're going to take a look at each one of them. First one, eubacteria. So eubacteria is the same as bacteria. You should know that we're talking about the same thing. Archaea bacteria, because it has the word archaea in there, archaea bacteria is talking about archaea. So that's our second kingdom. And then we have Protista, fungi, plants, animals. Those are our four kingdoms falling under the big domain called eukarya. So let's take a look at each one of these four kingdoms that fall under the eukarya. The first one is called Protista. Protists are usually and mostly unicellular. They could either be autotrophs or heterotrophs. This is something you have to remember. Autotrophs can synthesize their own food. So it's not just plants that can synthesize their own food. Some protists can also make their own food. They can survive on their own. And but some of them are heterotrophs, meaning that they have to rely on other organisms for food. So if you can watch some of those videos and see how they move around and survive. However, protists, they might be completely irrelevant to us besides producing oxygen sometimes, but they can also cause diseases such as malaria. Now, the second one is fungi. You have to remember at least one example of fungi, and it's so easy. They're mushrooms. Look at these pretty mushrooms. So fungi can either be unicellular or multicellular. They're all heterotrophic, meaning they all have to obtain food. They cannot make their own sugar and digest sugar that they make. They're very important decomposers. You have to remember the function of fungi. For us, they're decomposers. They help breaking down the dead things, help cleaning up the planet. Otherwise, there will just be corpses all over the place. And certain fungi can have a mutualistic relationship with algae and form lichens. Remember when we talk about lichens, those are kind of if you look at a tree and it has some whitish, greenish scabs on the side of the trees, those are usually lichens formed by fungi and algae. They can produce sexually or asexually, and examples are yeast, molds, and mushrooms. And I would say mushrooms are the easiest ones to remember. Now, plants are all multicellular and they're all autotrophic, meaning they make their own food and they have multiple cells. Some of them have vascular tissues and some of them don't have vascular tissues. So if you look at mosses that are really short and they have to be at moist places in order to live, there's a reason for that. Is because they don't have water and food transport system set up. It doesn't have a system to transport water from the root to the top. That's why they have to be so close to the ground and stay at a moist place. So those mosses have no vascular tissues, and they were developed, they evolved way earlier than, let's say, trees, for example. So they all have cell walls. Cell walls are made out of cellulose, and they can carry out photosynthesis and store carbohydrates as starch, as we talked about before. They go through phases of being gametophytes and sporophytes, meaning that Sometimes they're diploid, sometimes they're haploid for some plants. They would go through, entire phases of the entire plant being mostly diploid or mostly haploid, and they kind of go through phases. Unlike us, where we have diploid and haploid cells in us all the time, we're mostly diploid. So examples, green algae, mosses, ferns, and flowering plants. And mosses and ferns are non-vascular plants. The last one is animals. They're all multicellular, all heterotrophic. Most can move, some cannot. Most animals have a dominant diploid stage, meaning most of the cells in the animals' bodies are diploid. And there are 35 phyla of animals. That you don't have to know. So this chart right here kind of puts all the things that we talk about in this video together. So take another look, pause the video, take another look at this chart before you go back and fill out the rest of the review sheet. And then you'll be good. Oh, and I think you can join this quizzes. You can click on this quizzes from the link and try it out yourself. I think we used it as a homework.